Welcome back to another episode of the Bring the Juice podcast. I am your co-host, Cody Felger. Alongside me, as always, Derek Larger. Derek, how have you been enjoying this crazy week within the NFL and all the crazy stuff around that with the coronavirus, all that stuff? How are you doing, my man, with all this stuff happening?
I'm doing all right, just as well as anybody else is, I guess. Just, keeping myself busy with watching what the NFL's doing and we've been cranking out videos, and that's pretty much all I've been doing, working and cranking out these videos. That's pretty much all that we've been doing so far. So I'm doing all right.
Absolutely. It's been crazy, man. We've been talking, I know, off air a lot. It's crazy because a little over a week ago, we hit the 1,000 subscribers mark, which we've been looking to achieve for a long time there. And now, within this week, we produced a lot of content, and we're already at 1,100 subscribers. It's kind of crazy. We gained about 100 in a week. So
Yeah.
I think that's super awesome. Shout out to you new people who are subscribing. We're very thankful to have you listening to us, and we say welcome. Derek, today I wanted to kind of talk about something that one of the people who follow me on Twitter kind of suggested. I put out a tweet basically saying, like, what are some topics you'd like for us to cover? And someone, or I guess it was more so I remember I was traveling back. So I just got back last night from Florida. I was down there this week, obviously. You guys, I called in from the phone, but it just wasn't the same as speaking from my mic. So, I called in there, but I was traveling the last couple of days back from Florida, and I sent out a tweet that basically said, hey, I'm not driving right now. We're heading back. I have some free time. Send me some questions. And one of our followers on there sent me this kind of question, and I thought it was really good, and I thought that we could kind of make a segment out of it. Basically, it was a question of making a video on potential free agent steals for low budget that the Colts could still make. And so I thought, man, that's a great topic. The Colts have made a couple moves in free agency. They've been rumored to a couple, but have only made those two moves via trade with the 49ers for DeForest Buckner, and then signing quarterback Phillip Rivers, and then obviously re-signing their own guys as well. But I thought that we could do, in this episode, Derek, kind of an in-depth look a little bit more at some of those guys who are still out there on the market, because there are some guys who I think could potentially fit well with the Colts. There are some guys who will command a little bit more, which we'll kind of stay away from. Then there will be some guys who we think, okay, these could be some guys that could help the Colts out immediately in 2020, and they won't break the bank. They're not going to be a Jadeveon Clowney, type of contract, but they're going to be, more of a what we've seen in the past with Chris Ballard, more of a deal where it's kind of under the radar. It's not like a huge deal. It's kind of a bargain deal, if you will. Yeah. But he's gotten some production out of those deals before. And so I thought that we could look at that today and look at, there's a lot of guys still available. There really is. And I thought there were some guys that we could look at. Derek, who is your first guy that you think could potentially fit well with the Colts? And a guy that the Colts could probably get relatively cheap. Who's your first guy here?
I think the first guy that I was wanting to think about was Rashad Perryman. I think that if you're looking at a Robbie Anderson, obviously that guy could definitely fit into the Colts system. But I think ultimately the reason he's not getting a lot of offers right now is due to the fact that I think he's asking for too much. Even Spot Track has his market value at around $14 million a year, and with a guy like Robbie Anderson, who has had some injuries, and he's not a marquee wide receiver, I don't want to pay over $12 million on a wide receiver that's consistently not just been a big guy for that offense. So I would love to get a Rashad Perryman, a guy who was basically the third wide receiver in the Tampa Bay system, a 6'2", 200-pound wide receiver that last season definitely broke out into a form of which you'd like to see as a free agent. Obviously, with Tampa Bay, it wasn't working out for everyone, and I think he's wanting a little bit of money. And obviously, the Buccaneers are wanting to implement. They went after Tom Brady and fixing that offensive line and some other things. I doubt that they're looking to re-sign their third best wide receiver. I just think, when you're looking at wide receivers, you want to try and get guys that'll fit. And Rashad Perryman, a guy that, tried to prove himself last year. He did a little bit, just not a lot, given the circumstance of the team. But again, if we're looking at guys that, want to prove that they got it, Rashad, I believe, is only 26 years old, still a young
Yeah.
guy, still has potential. And you could get him on the cheap for right now, just since the production's not quite there. But get somebody like that could be a solid guy that you could sign for around 8 to 10 million a year. That's not too bad for me.
No, not at all. And you mentioned he's 26 years old. He's kind of a bigger body. He's 6'2". He's a guy that was a former first-round pick, if I'm not mistaken, with the Baltimore Ravens a few years ago. Just didn't work out, like you mentioned. He came back. He was selected 26th overall by the Ravens there, and he has a lot of upside. He's still very young, like you mentioned. He's a bigger body type of player. He kind of actually gives me a little bit bigger of Paris Campbell vibes in the fact that he's fast, but he's also not a small receiver.
Yeah.
I know that's something that, like, when Paris Campbell was initially drafted, I was like, oh, he's probably like a T.Y. Hilton type of mold, but he's 5'11", almost 6 foot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the vibes I get from Perriman. There's just a lot of stuff. Coming out of college, he was actually compared a lot to Devontae Parker, who I know his first couple of years in Miami was kind of labeled a bust, but he's, this last year he really did really good stuff. And so it'd be interesting, Derek, to see if the Colts would want to take a flyer on a guy like Perriman. He's not going to ask as much as Robbie Anderson, like you said. He's still very young, and has a lot of upside. And also mentioning, at Tampa Bay, he had 645 yards, 6 touchdowns. I mean, that's pretty good for a number 3 wide receiver. I mean, he was sitting behind 2 of the top wide receivers in the NFL, not just on the team, in the NFL, and Mike Evans and then Chris Godwin. And so he's a guy I think that if he gets more of an opportunity, maybe he takes more advantage, and the stats are a little bit more. I always like to think, man, stats are good, but I think stats are kind of overrated sometimes. And so,
Yeah.
You look at why he didn't have great production last year. I mean, Tampa Bay had one of the best passing offenses in the league, but I just think it was a lack of playing time. I just think that, when you have those kind of guys, and when you have OJ Howard and you have a high-powered offense, sometimes, man, not everybody can get fed. And, just for what Perriman did, and for, the kind of, what he was trying to prove, I think he proved that there's still something to be tapped into there. And like we said, he's still a young receiver. And the Colts, obviously, with the hiring of Mike Groh this year as their wide receivers coach, that could be appealing because he's a guy that's he's worked with some guys like Amari Cooper and some other guys, some very talented guys in the league. So that could definitely be really interesting. And that could be an interesting fit. And I think it could be a good fit, especially when we know with Phillip Rivers, he likes to give his guys a lot of, one-on-one jump ball, 50-50 opportunities. And Perriman has a size where he can go up and get the ball for you. And that's why also, with my next guy, I thought that the Colts should re-sign him, and that's Devin Funchess. And Devin Funchess, man, he's the guy that signed a 1-year contract last year, $13 million. He saw 1 game action, and he got injured and was out for the year. But he's a big body, still young. He's 6'4". He's a guy that can go up and get the ball on the jump balls, and he's a guy that I would like to bring back as well. Obviously, I don't think he's going to be commanding a lot of money. So I think he's a guy you can get back relatively cheap. The question that I had, Derek, before with Jacoby Brissett was, does Devin Funchess really want to come back and play with Jacoby Brissett? But maybe now the allure with Phillip Rivers of thinking, okay, now I'm going to get targets. Now we have a chance to win. All those factors maybe are something that could contribute now to Funchess kind of agreeing to come back to Indianapolis, especially since this last year his market's going to be down. Why not sign a 1-year prove-it deal? I probably would do that if I was the Colts. Sign him on a 1-year deal, bring him back and see what you got, man. And if, he doesn't do well there with 1 year, you're not tied to him at any point. You can let him walk next year. Yeah. But I think at this point, Derek, for me, it's just about getting depth and getting potential on that wide receiver core. I know that we've talked a lot and we've said we think the Colts should draft a wide receiver. Some people have said at 13 when the Colts had that 13th pick. But I think it's no doubt the Colts should draft a wide receiver 2nd to 3rd round there.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's a guy that I'm also interested in. Who's your next guy here that you think the Colts should potentially look to sign?
Yeah, so obviously with the loss of Pierre Desir, you have to think about what it's going to look like for the cornerback situation. This could potentially be uh, it could definitely be a situation where we go with a corner in the second round. It is quite a
Mm,
possibility, especially if one of those main guys falls into the second round later in the draft, and we could definitely snag one. Would not surprise me, and it wouldn't even surprise me if Pierre Desir finds his way back with the Colts at some point, if he's not taken somewhere else. But my understanding, I think Pierre Desir is probably going to end up finding a home here relatively soon, given his ability. Um, I think that just two guys that I would like to see come to Indianapolis. I'm not even going to talk about Xavier Rhodes because that's just going to be something where I have no idea what that's going to happen for. He is 29. You have uh we were saying that age had a lot to do with it when it came to the age of a Pierre Desir. Ultimately, I think if you're wanting to go with a guy that you want to try and keep around, I think a Logan Ryan. I know he's about the same age as a Pierre Desir is, but Logan Ryan again is still a seasoned vet. He definitely was a good corner piece for Tennessee last year. Um, and it would be great to take another piece away from the Tennessee defense. That would always be something good for me there. Um, I mean, there's just a whole bunch of other corners that you could think of. You could also think of getting a guy like a Ronald Darby from Philadelphia, being
mm,
that he's so young. Uh, he's obviously had some injury problems, we know, but I mean, so has all of the Philadelphia secondary. I mean, I feel bad for the Philadelphia Eagles. Their entire secondary went down that one year in 2018. I mean, holy cow. And Ronald Darby has been a guy that, has played well when he's on. It's just obviously issues with injuries. But from what his market value is right now, they're only saying that he's at a market value of around uh about 4 or 5 million. So I mean, you could definitely get him for something cheap if you're thinking you take the chance on a younger guy that, if his injuries just don't get the better of him, that could be a possibility.
mhm. Yeah, a couple guys here. I want to shift now for me, staying on that defensive side of the ball. I want to shift to the defensive line. And I think there's some guys the Colts have been rumored to early on in the season, or early on in the offseason, I should say, that I think could be potential fits there. The one guy, Shelby Harris, is a guy that I thought that we have talked about how we would not mind Shelby Harris. I was always of the mind if you just sign Shelby Harris, I think you still need to do something on that defensive line. But
Mhm.
signing a guy like Shelby Harris, especially knowing how bare the cupboard is, even with DeForest Buckner, there's still a lot of unknown there, especially the interior of the defensive line. And so signing a guy
Mhm.
like Harris, I think, would be potentially a good fit there. And then even, the Colts have been rumored. I don't know how true this is. Colts have been rumored to potentially be interested in Jadeveon Clowney, but, say that doesn't work out, say he resigns with Seattle or goes somewhere else. I would look back. I would look at bringing back Jabal Sheard, a guy that's been consistent for the Colts. I mean, he's been up to last year. He had been pretty much one of the most consistent defenders as far as games played. I know last year he went down in training camp and missed a few games, but overall, in the grand scheme of things, with his craft from 2017 through 2019, Jabal Sheard's been one of the most consistent and best defenders that the Colts have
Yeah.
had throughout that time. And so, obviously there are some factors there with how much production in the pass rushing department can you get. But I think we had this conversation yesterday, Derek, and I think it's interesting. I said, man, why haven't the Colts brought back Jabal Sheard? I mean, he's a guy that just seems like a no-brainer to bring back. He's a guy that, Chris Ballard has talked super highly of. He was really Chris Ballard's big kind of first get there in free agency in 2017. And so I was kind of like, why haven't the Colts brought back Sheard at this point? I think, maybe it's something where they're in on Clowney and they're trying to battle it out and see kind of what the market is there. And they kind of have Jabal Sheard as, if we don't land a guy like Clowney, maybe we bring back Sheard on a couple year, 1 or 2 year deal there. And then we look next year at upgrading at that defensive end position. But for me, Derek, a guy like Sheard is just a guy that's a no-brainer to bring back. I just think,
Yeah.
looking at it now,
If you
the
can
Colts
get him
don't
right.
really have. I mean, DeForest Buckner, obviously, he's a monster against both the run and getting after the passer. But at the defensive end position, besides Justin Houston, the Colts don't really have a guy that's super good and stout against the run at the defensive end position.
Yeah,
I mean, they have
the
some
thing
guys
is
like Kamoko
too,
Toure and Danik.
Yeah, you
Go
got
ahead.
like when you look at Justin Houston too, people are forgetting the fact that this man's about to be 33 years old. I mean, I understand that like last year, given the defensive end position, the way it went down, right? You had Jabal Sheard out for the beginning of the season. You had Kamoko Toure go down early. So Justin Houston had to play a lot. I understand that Justin Houston's a good player, but understand he's getting older. And you need to make sure that you're limiting his snaps. If we can get another defensive end to ensure that we can lower his amount of snaps just a little bit to the point where he will be fresher come towards end of December, that's exactly what you want in a Justin Houston. When he's fresh, this guy is definitely still good. And when you were talking about Shelby Harris, I mean, people tried to bring up the fact, oh, he's 28, he's going to be 29 going into this next season. Yeah, but he's only been in the league 4 years. He's not, he's still, despite his age, he's still not very old. I mean, he's just not had a lot of wear and tear on his body yet. This is still another guy that, despite his age, still has a lot of youth in him due to the fact that he's only been in the league 4 years.
He kind of gives you a little bit, to a better degree, a Marcus Hunt type of vibe. Like Marcus Hunt was over 30, but he didn't enter the league for a couple of years. So really, his NFL playing body was, late 20s. And so I get what you're saying there. Yeah. Definitely a guy I'd be interested in. I think the contract, if I had to look there at Jabal Sheard, I kind of did some deep diving into kind of what Jabal Sheard signed for the Colts in 2017. It was about, his last contract paid him about 8,500. Wait, I'm sorry. Maybe you can tell me what this is. 8,500,000, so I don't mess it up.
Yeah, but anyway, that's $8.5 million. $8.5 million a year.
I was like, that's not 85. What am I talking about? 8.5 million per year. I structured it in the tweet such a way where it looked like 85,000, and I was like, that's not right.
Yeah.
Anyway, they paid him like $8.5 million on the 3-year deal, I believe it was. And so, yeah. I would think maybe something like that. You could probably get him for a little bit cheaper. Obviously probably sign him for less years there. But anywhere like that, in that range, or maybe a little bit less, I'd be willing to sign Sheard to a 1 to 2 year deal there. Like you said, just to really, ensure that you have help on that defensive end position, especially with Justin Houston getting up there in age. And you look at it, Derek, last year when Jabal Sheard was out those first couple games, the Colts really struggled to stop the run. I mean, we saw that in the first game. We saw that throughout the year. Whenever Jabal Sheard came back, it seemed like, for the most part, that Colts run defense really, was excelled with Jabal Sheard's presence in there. So he's a guy that I'm definitely interested in bringing back as well. Yeah. Another guy that we've talked about on this podcast before, and, I've heard kind of rumored potentially to the Colts. Another guy kind of gives me those Shelby Harris vibes is Derek Wolfe. He's a guy that, had been with the Broncos for a long time there. I believe he's either late 20s or early 30s now. He's just another piece that you could potentially add in there just for defensive depth. And when, whenever on that defensive line, you're rotating guys in, you're trying to keep guys fresh, and you bring in a guy like Wolfe, he could be a solid player for you. Just adding depth to that defensive line. I mean, that's something, man, when Chris Ballard has talked about the offensive line, he said, you have those starters, right? You have those 5 starters there. But really, you need 7, 8, 9 on that offensive line because the wear and tear of an NFL season, it's been 16 games. It'll be 17 games in 2021. The wear and tear is even going to be more now. You need guys that are able to step in for a game, for a few snaps, whatever it is, and guys that the drop-off won't be so huge, right? It won't be an Anthony Costanzo to LaRaven Clark drop-off. It'll be more of a Ryan Kelly to Josh Andrews. I know, and that's unfortunate. Josh Andrews signed with another team, but I thought Josh Andrews played pretty decent, and you just need a guy that's not gonna basically lose you games like LaRaven Clark could. That's another story for another podcast. But anyway, I would be interested in bringing in Wolf and just continuing to add to that defensive line. I mean, right now you think you got Houston contract, Houston, Toure, Banogu, Al-Qadim Muhammad. So that's 4 defensive ends there. And then you got obviously Buckner, you got Autry, you got Grover Stewart, and you just got some pieces there, but you could still add to that, and I think that's what the Colts should do. And even if you bring back Shoot, I think that defensive interior, I mean, you have 3 guys really right now, and you could argue Tyquan Lewis could be 4 there, but he kind of rotates everywhere. But I'm okay with adding a guy that's a veteran in there, and kind of Chris Ballard has also talked about adding veteran leadership to that, to basically the entire team.
Yeah,
I think primarily the defense. He's talking about with the loss of obviously last year when they lost Mike Mitchell, that was a big loss, and he talked about Al Woods, the loss. So more on the defensive side. And I think you could add some guys some veterans there that could definitely give that defensive line some leadership, because it is a pretty young defensive line. But those are some of the guys that I have. Derek, are there any other guys that kind of pique your interest, maybe along the offensive line? Because I know the Colts have lost 2 of their backup guys, and obviously they re-signed LaRaven Clark. But I mean, the coverage is pretty bare beyond those starters there. Are there any of those guys that would pique your interest on the offensive line that are still available?
Yeah, let me look here. I'm making sure I got this guy down. So let me make sure I get this. I want to make sure that I got the available part. And you mentioned Derek Wolf. He is 30 years old. He's going to he's had 7 years of experience. So you're right. It is one of those guys that, it is an interest to wonder, kind of what it is that, how long he's actually going to be around. So that'll definitely be interesting. Let's go to guards here. Did see you have Michael Parson that's still available from San Francisco. Josh Klein, I know a lot of people have been inquiring about him. It's very interesting that he's still around. Evan Boehm, definitely an interesting name here.
Bring him back.
Yeah. There's a couple people that, as guards, I'm not too worried about. Thankfully, I'm not one of those people that have been saying that, since Braden Smith was a guard all throughout high school and with college, he played mostly guard, so we should move him back into guard position. I'm not for that. I prefer to keep Braden Smith at right tackle, where he has been since he's come into the league 3 years ago. I mean, Zach has been with me on this too, and I think you are too, that, Braden Smith obviously is not a top level right tackle yet, but in regards to, how he's played and being put up against like some of the worst matchups for him, because, he's got the Jadeveon Clowneys, the Von Millers, the JJ Watts, and other people like that to go up against him, because, he's the weak link when it comes to, him and Anthony Costanzo. That kind of factors into it, but I like where Braden Smith's development is at. If anything, we just need to continue to get a guard. Josh Klein is definitely one that you could think of, but it just certainly does seem like Ballard's going to have to address that here soon, because, losing Josh Andrews and obviously Haig, both are definitely it's a disappointment.
Yeah, it is. And that was unfortunate with the whole Joe Haig situation, which I don't think we've talked about really on this podcast. But, the contract that Haig signed there with the Buccaneers, it wasn't like – it was a 1-year deal. It was only like for a couple million. I know a lot of Colts fans were up in arms. Why in the world we could have afforded Haig? I think it's something simply where Haig wanted a chance to start. And also, he's playing with the GOAT. He's playing with Tom Brady.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't you want to go play with that? And obviously there's, some familiarity maybe with, some of the people on the Buccaneers and stuff like that. But I think it's just something, man, where Joe Haeg wanted a chance to start. He's been the top backup for the Colts for a few years now. Since that offensive line was really, stabilized there in the 2018 season, halfway through, when obviously, Braden Smith moved to right tackle, and then Mark Glowinski played the right guard. Ever since then, that offensive line has been intact, and it's been one of the better offensive lines in the league. So let's be fair. If Joe Haeg re-signed with the Colts, there's probably not going to be a starting spot for him.
Yeah.
I don't fault Joe Haeg at all. I don't fault the Colts at all. They just wanted to give him a chance, man, to go out there and start and prove what he's got. And I'm all for it, man. I love seeing, former Colts players doing well in the league. So I'm definitely excited for Joe Haeg and kind of protecting Tom Brady, see where they use him, because it's interesting. He's played like every single position except for center. So wherever they need him, I'd love it if they could kind of settle him in one spot for a while and let him. I always liked him better as a guard personally.
Yeah.
But, it'd be interesting to see, man, where the Buccaneers line him up. But shout out to Joe Haeg, man, potentially getting a starting opportunity with the Buccaneers.
Yeah.
Another guy, Derek, that I could be potentially interested in. You mentioned Evan Bain, which is interesting, bringing him back. I know the Colts traded him away last year. Another guy that was with the Colts in the 2017 season who actually played really well, but for some reason the Colts kind of let him walk, was Mike Person. He's a guard. He played with the 49ers. He was part of their Super Bowl team last year. He's a little bit older, but, he's a guy that you're not going to rely on to be a starter, but he could be a viable backup for you. And I wouldn't mind bringing him in just for offensive line depth. And he's a guy that's, been a capable starter. He started on probably arguably one of the better teams in football. I would argue the best overall team in football. And we know Patrick Mahomes and all that. We've talked about that, but I would bring him in. I would be interested to see, he has familiarity. Sorry, I can't speak today. With Indianapolis, he's been here before. I would be interested in seeing Mike Person coming back to the Colts potentially, just as some offensive line depth. But yeah, I mean that's all the guys that I really have. We've talked about Delanie Walker a little bit, and so if you guys haven't heard that video on Delanie Walker, be sure to check that one out. I think it could potentially be a short-term solution to pair with Jack Doyle and Mo Alley Cox. If you don't feel like you have to draft the tight end super early, I would still probably draft the tight end in the 3rd to 4th round, but that's just me. But definitely check out that video. Derek, are there any other guys that you think the Colts could get anywhere on the offense or defense the Colts could potentially look at getting that could kind of come at a bargain price, or is that kind of all the guys that you have?
That's mainly the guys that I've seen so far. And obviously I am not the mind of a Chris Ballard. Definitely something that will be interesting. I've seen multiple different reports of people, when it comes to the Pierre Desir release. When people kind of talk about it, they're coming from it either as a football mindset or as a person mindset. And that's the issue that we're having here is, it is difficult because I was a fan of Pierre Desir. Every single person that is a Colts fan is a fan of Pierre Desir. He has been a model citizen, has been a great guy for the locker room, has played his heart out. Obviously, just over the last year and a half, production has gone down and injuries have continued to climb. That's his issue. And unfortunately, in this business, in the NFL business, even if you're somewhat up there with some of the better ones, you can get cut at any moment. It's unfortunate. I mean, I'm not worried about, Pierre Desir's future. That guy's going to have a future. He's going to get somewhere. Either he comes back or he's going to go somewhere else. Somebody is going to pick up Pierre Desir. Somebody's going to take a chance on him. It's just, people who are upset by this move are looking at it from the stance of, he was such a great person, such a great thing for the locker room. Why did we cut him for this? And never once have heard anybody on anywhere talk about we cut him because he was bad at football. Or he was, or they were upset because, he was amazing at football and that sort of thing. No, people were kind of just upset over the simple fact that, he was a decent player and he was a great person for our locker room. We just didn't, it just didn't mold over time. And, when you're getting up there in age, he's 29 now, getting to be around 30. And we're paying him that kind of money. It's understandable why Chris Ballard's doing it, and Ballard's still trying to make more moves. And I kind of threw the shade at some Colts fans. You're like, you wanted Ballard to make big money moves. Well, now he's doing it, and now you're still complaining. So can't help everybody, but yeah, the
No.
same thing goes for what you said about Joe Haig. Thank you again, Pierre Desir, for everything. Hopefully we could see you back in a Colts uniform at some point. Who knows? But even if we don't, appreciate you, everything you did. You're always my favorite guy in the secondary. And good luck to you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I just came up with a few other names looking at this list. You mentioned Pierre Desir, and it had me look. And another guy that I think is interesting to me is Prince Amukamara. I think I'm saying that right. Amukamara, whatever you say.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was a cornerback for the Bears last year. I believe he's probably a little bit older than Pierre Desir. But I believe at this point in his career, he's probably a little bit slightly an upgrade from Pierre Desir. He's 30 years old, so he's a year older than Pierre Desir. He's a former number 1 pick. He was 19th overall by the Bears in 2011. He's a guy that's always been a solid player to me. He hasn't been a superstar, but everywhere he's went, he's been a player, man, that has been solid for that secondary. Obviously, the Bears have such a good defense. He was a part of that defense for the last couple of years. He's a guy, man, that I would be interested potentially in bringing in. I don't know how much he would cost, but he's a guy, man, that could potentially be a fit there. And then, staying in the secondary, a guy that we've talked about a little bit is Eric Berry, the safety formerly of the Chiefs. The last couple of years, he hasn't really played a whole lot of football. He's the guy that's, also a former high pick in the league, and he was one of the better safeties in the league for a long time. He's on the other side of 30 now, so that's a fact. And then he's had some injury history in the last couple of years, but he's the guy that I don't think will come very expensive, especially considering what you do with Clayton Geathers. If you re-sign Geathers, then maybe Barry's off the table. But,
Yep.
As it stands right now, the Colts have not been rumored at all to be linked with, even being remotely interested in bringing back Clayton Geathers. So that's a guy that I could potentially see there. I think he's a guy, man, that provides that veteran leadership like Ballard has talked about, with that friction. He's the guy that's going to hold people accountable. And it's not like he has to come in and start day one. He'll probably most likely be the number 3 or maybe even number 4 safety, depending on how George Odom continues to develop. But he's a guy, man, that I could potentially see bringing in and just giving a shot there. I'm going to throw a guy out here, Derek, and I don't know how you're going to react to this, but I'm going to throw a guy out there and kind of see. It's a guy that was linked to the Colts in 2017. Actually, Jim Irsay flew him out to Indianapolis on his private jet, it was rumored. And that's Dontari Poe. He's a guy that is a little bit older. He was one of more dominant defensive linemen a few years ago, former number 1 overall pick again in 2012. I believe he's 29 or 30 now. He's 29 years old. He's just a guy that you could add and continue to develop depth, and he probably won't come at the deal he was gonna command there in 2017. What are your thoughts on potentially bringing in Dontari Poe or even some of the other guys that I've mentioned?
Yeah, with Poe, being 29 years old, being in the NFL now for 8 years, has bounced around from several different teams over the last few years. You mentioned it, how, again, it's all about depth pieces at this point, right? Especially at the defensive tackle position, like, we know who our starting 2 are, at least at the moment. It's just kind of one of those things you need to continue to add depth. I don't know about Poe. It's just one of those things, he got paid and then, he still wasn't anywhere what they expected him to be. And I just don't know what to expect from him. Mostly what you're getting out of him, again, is a rushing kind of, is a rush kind of guy. You're going to put him there to clog holes in the middle. That's his job because, he's 325 pounds. That's a big dude. Again,
Yeah.
I just think of him again as a larger Margus Hunt. I mean, the direction that we're trying to go at with this defensive line right now, I wouldn't even really think about entertaining him unless it's really low.
No, that's fair. I just thought I'd throw that name out there because I know it was rumored with the Colts back in 2017. I remember I was kind of clamoring, like, I want Dontari Poe on the Colts now because he had like no talent back in 2017. But he's a guy that could be potentially interesting to me. Here's a guy that's a little bit more expensive, but maybe he's a guy, since he's up there in age, is Everson Griffin from Minnesota. He's a guy that's probably not going to command as much money as Jadeveon Clowney, but he's a guy, man. If you plug him into that defensive end, maybe he kind of fills, the hole left from if you don't re-sign Jabal Sheard. He's been a guy that's been a really good defender for a long time. He's just a guy that I would be interested in. He's 32 years old, so he's a little bit older, but he's just a guy, man, that I think, oh man, if you would sign him, that defensive line would be pretty darn good. It's already pretty darn good now, but if you sign him at the other defensive end alongside Justin Houston, you got some young guys in Kamoko Toure, Ben Banigou. If you draft another guy, then you got some stuff, man, where you have some veteran leadership, but you also have some youth and some potential at the pass rush position. What would you think about signing Everson Griffin? This will be the last one for me, but what do you think about Griffin?
Yeah, like you mentioned, again, it's about the experience of it. Everson Griffin basically stated that he is not returning to Minnesota under any circumstances. So he is most likely going to go somewhere. Having 9 years experience, he's definitely a guy that's been around for a while. Yeah, if the price is right, I wouldn't be opposed to it. People are trying to make it seem as though we keep signing these older guys right now that it would stunt the growth of a Kamoko Toure or Ben Banigou or something like that. Guys, they're 1 year into the league. Okay, they're 1 year. It's okay. They were rookies last year, and they're still learning. They're still getting taught by Robert Mathis himself, one of the best defensive linemen to ever play the game. And you can just relax that, and especially with Everson Griffin, you say we get him for a year. So what? We're not going to play him every down. It's not like he's going to be an every down kind of guy. I mean, that's ultimately the thing.
Yeah.
These guys are to fill roles where they come in on obvious pass rushing downs and you bring them in and they destroy. That's what you need to have happen. So, yeah, again, for a right price, I would be perfectly fine with bringing in a seasoned vet like Everson Griffin. Very smart guy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times you were mentioning, Derek, people kind of like, oh man, why would you want the Colts to bring in these guys on the other side of 30? Obviously, Philip Rivers is a guy who the Colts brought in. I think people have a lot of Ryan Grigson, still PTSD from that era. Where the Colts brought in Andre Johnson, Frank Gore, Todd Harriman, Trent Cole, all of these guys over the age of 30, and like one of them performed. So
yeah, right.
I definitely get that. But, if you sign a guy that is, proven, and it's not a guy that you're like relying on, like the difference for me here, Derek, is in 2017, the Colts signed these guys to be all pro players. Like with Everson Griffin, if he's not an all pro player, it's not the end of the world. If he's just a decent player, I mean, that works. Like it's not a guy that you're going to like live and die by. If he doesn't perform, you're screwed. That's not how it is. It's just a guy adding to that defense. The Colts have some other talent, and it's just like something, man, where I get like why people are kind of hesitant, but I just don't see the correlation or the connection at all with this. And I'm perfectly fine with bringing in another guy on, offense or defense who's maybe around 30 or a little bit over 30. If he's the guy that produces, man, I'm totally okay with it.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think it does it for this podcast. Thanks, guys, for listening. It's crazy, man. Like I mentioned, we're already at 1,100 subscribers. At least when I last checked, we just reached 1,100, so we might be a few more now. It's wild to see in basically a week us gaining 100 subscribers. So thank you guys who have subscribed this week. We want to get out more content now because we know you guys just eat that stuff up, especially with the quarantine and all this stuff. People are stuck at home, man, and they want to hear about the Colts, about that content stuff. And man, we're trying to crank out as much content as we can on our thoughts and all these different topics. Derek, I know we have this huge list that we want to do this off season. We have about a month till the draft as it stands right now happens. So we're definitely going to bring out some mock drafts. We're going to bring out a lot of content for you guys these next few weeks. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Again, thank you guys for subscribing. We love it. We love all your interaction, all your feedback. We don't have to always agree, which I think is great.
Yeah.
But we love how you guys have been, for the most part, respectful towards us and our opinions. So thank you guys from Derek and myself. We appreciate you guys, and go Colts.